Hi everyone, Dr. Ahang here, and in this module we are going to continue our exploration of gamification by looking at various elements of games to see how they may be utilized to achieve your goals, as well as the psychological approach known as behaviorism as it relates to gamification. So let's start with our toolbox. Now, if you recall, gamification isn't about turning everything into games. It's about analyzing objectives to determine how elements of game thinking and play may be used to shape a desired action. So to do that, we need to look at these elements and determine what their purposes are. Now, these components include things like awarding or detracting points for certain behaviors. Some refer to this as pointsification because often people think that simply adding a point system to any event is basically what gamification is. Other elements include the use of tokens to represent players in a setting, sort of like an avatar or a character in a video game, or the shoe or top hat on a Monopoly board, something that represents the player in context of the game. There's also the progression bar, which is an indicator of one's achievement toward an end, or a mission, or a quest. Speaking of which, there are quests, like Donkey Kong. If you remember Donkey Kong, it was a video game. The quest was to free Pauline from the big gorilla named Donkey Kong by jumping over barrels and other obstacles. It was the first appearance of the character everyone knows today as Mario. Incidentally, Mario was originally named Jumpman because that's what he did. He jumped over barrels. What else? There are leaderboards. This is when you get to see who has the highest score and who has the next highest score, and so forth. These leaderboards, much like the progression bar, tend to motivate players to keep playing so they can be the best or be the fastest. Of course, there's the infamous badging involved with certain games too. If you remember, this is when you are given a digital icon that signifies your status in context of a game. Just like when, with scouting merit badges. You can get your astronomy badge or your archery badge, and you wear these badges on your uniform to show your stuff or to point out your level of mastery. It's the same thing like in the military. Your military insignia designates your rank in the Army or in the Navy. There's leveling up. This is when you complete a specific objective, and for doing so, you move into another category or level, which will sometimes give you additional powers or abilities. Now, this is a major element of games today. Kids are used to the idea of having minor achievements along a quest line, and they call this leveling up. There's a variant of leveling up component in games, and that is content unlocking. So you may be in a certain level of the game, or your character may have achieved a certain experience level, but in context of that level, certain behaviors may unlock aspects of a game that you didn't have access to before. So you have to complete a task before you can even attempt another task that might lead you to another level. Then there's the element of playing a game in context of a team, which requires a pooling of various abilities and communication and cooperation. There's the ability to not only receive points, but to perhaps use those points to acquire virtual goods, like medicine to heal quickly or to dress up your avatar in a customized manner. Then we have the rules of the game. Now remember, a set of rules is almost always required before something can be called a game. For example, turn taking, or the minimum maximum number of players involved, or the conditions for the win state, or what you have to do to be the winner. These are the rules of the game. So when you want to gamify an experience, you need to think about these elements. But there are other elements that you'll need to consider as well, like the dynamics. The dynamics that you're looking to establish. For example, limiting abilities. When you limit abilities, that establishes an interesting dynamic that often frames the types of emotions that a player experiences while playing, like joy, or the sense of accomplishment, or frustration, and so forth. You may want to consider the journey that was discussed earlier in the course, that sense of progressing from one state to another. You should also think about relationships in the game too, like amongst players. Think of chess. A pawn's relationship to a rook is quite different than its relationship to a bishop. In addition to the game elements and the dynamic you're looking to create, you'll also need to consider a middle level, or the mechanical level of a gamified experience. What moves the game forward? Is it challenges? Is it the feedback that the player receives? Or is it simply the turns taken? How does cooperation or competition work to create and support the dynamic that you're looking for? Now, of all of these elements that we've discussed, which three do you think are most often seen in gamified settings? The trick to successfully gamifying an experience is not to just throw a hodgepodge of these elements into a conventional experience and call it gamification. It's not that easy. As Dr. Werbach taught us, the elements are not the game. The game is the thing in between the elements and the dynamics and the mechanics that we just discussed. It's how this stuff is connected that makes or breaks a gamification initiative. For example, collecting points to get rewards, which is usually how we do things in education, that's not inherently fun or interesting, at least not to me. Getting a reward isn't necessarily fun. Making a reward be the center of your gamified experience is not always a good idea. As a matter of fact, I contend that by the time that a kid gets to middle school, collecting points is old hat. Just think how that might be the case with adults. For example, yes, I enjoy getting frequent flyer miles when I fly, but the frequent flyer miles don't motivate me to take a vacation. It's not the points that compel me to book a vacation. They may, however, compel me to book my vacation with the same airline. So it's about thinking first of your objective. If my objective is to get you to book a vacation, then I may want to see how I can make the experience of exploring potential vacations to book a game like Quest. Maybe it's more about establishing a way for the player to engage a community that may motivate him to book a particular vacation. Or perhaps creating a system wherein after I book a vacation, I receive a certain amount of credit that I can use toward booking my next vacation. But I have to do it in a 4-month period before the credit goes invalid. Or perhaps creating a virtual vacationing game wherein your avatar experiences vacations in exotic places, and by accomplishing particular tasks, he gets health points, a certain number of which will unlock other vacation spots, thereby reinforcing the player's knowledge of different vacation spots, as well as the thought that vacationing is a good thing for your health. So think of a game that you know pretty well and ask yourself what the game's elements are. What are the game's mechanics? Why do you think the rules are set up the way they are? What is it about the game that compels a player to continue to play? Is there a journey involved? Is there an element of the game that may not be necessary? Is an idea being reinforced through the gameplay, as in Monopoly? In Monopoly, what is the idea that Monopoly reinforces in players? Is it about purchasing real estate? Is it about handling finances? Is it about capitalism in general? Then think of a game that you really didn't enjoy playing and ask yourself, how come? Why was it not fun or engaging? What was the journey that the player is asked to go on? Finally, ask yourself, what are the games that we see played in school settings, either with students or staff, and how can they be tweaked or modified to achieve better results? For example, can we apply game mechanics of experience points or hit points to the grading process? So, for instance, in the real world, we rarely start out with an A+, right? So when you start out a new job, or you're basically the noob. When you get into a social circle, you're the low man on the social totem pole, and you work your way up the ladder. Not start out at the top and see how long you can stay there, like we do in most conventional classroom settings. So experience points, or what I'll refer to as XP, have a similar effect of tracking learning, much like grading does, but in a subtly different manner. You start with 0 XP in a game, and for each activity you complete, you receive a certain amount of XP. You can even collect XP even if you don't successfully complete an activity. So if you kill the activity, you get the full XP for it. But if your performance is, how should we say, less than optimal, maybe you get 75% of the allocated XP. And if you blew it completely, then perhaps you only get 10% of the allocated XP. You may want to set up a system wherein students can trade in the XP they have for another shot at the activity. I don't know. Some people say it's not a good idea to give up XP. I wonder if your students will ask for more work to do just to accumulate a reserve of XP. This might create a system in the classroom where students can get the grade they want to simply by attempting an activity over and over again. You could set up a leaderboard to track student XP and motivate those kids that thrive on competition. I can see a situation arising wherein a group of students can see that they're clearly going to get an A in the class, but continue to strive to get more XP just to be the king of the hill. The XP you collect leads to different levels in the class. Of course, you have to get creative to think what each level in a class might mean. Does it multiply the number of XP you can collect? If you're in a different level, is there a new capacity that gets unlocked for the learner by achieving, let's say, a level 3 status? Oh, you could also introduce the idea of the Easter egg into the system. Now, if you recall, an Easter egg is a term used to describe secret responses to an undocumented or unannounced action. For example, if you go to google.com and do a search for the word tilt, well, why don't you go and see what happens when you search for tilt in google.com? So you can add these kinds of things, these Easter eggs, into the grading process. For example, the first student to reach a certain level will get a bonus amount of XP, or the first person to make the class laugh gets extra XP. First to submit an assignment before its due date gets extra XP. You'll of course need to think about the interplay between scores and XP. For example, if a student gets 80% on an assignment, she shouldn't just get 80 XP. You should have a multiplier in mind, so perhaps 2.5 or 4. So a student who gets 80% gets 320 experience points. Now this is just an idea. You'll need to look into it and look into it thoroughly. But the point is that a game element like XP or leaderboards can be simply incorporated into a learning experience to make it a bit more fun, a bit more gameful. So now it's time for you to get your final project started. Your final project is a proposal that you'll need to put together to solve a challenge posed in one of 2 scenarios. It's a large assignment and will require a considerable effort on your part, so we will not have a Module 8 assignment. Instead, you're going to use the last 2 weeks of the course to put your proposal together. Now, what's very important is that you pay close attention to the assignment requirements and, at the very least, meet them all. The purpose of the assignment is to provide you with an opportunity to review the contents of this course and to synthesize your learning. Now, whatever you do, don't underestimate the amount of time and work that you'll need to commit to this. Get started early and by all means have as much fun as you can. But there is one last thing. Now, when you look at the contents of this learning module, you're probably going to be a bit confused because, well, there doesn't seem to be much there. That's because you'll be working through the content of this and the last module through another learning management system. It's called 3D Game Lab. Now, I can already feel your anxiety level starting to peak, but I'm here to tell you not to worry. It's a very simple tool. It's a learning management system that was developed through Boise State, and it's geared specifically for gamifying the conventional learning experience. So you'll be accessing quests instead of module pages. Quests are just simply the tasks that you'll need to complete. For each quest you complete, you'll get a certain number of experience points. And the more experience points you get, the higher up the ranks you go. And the higher up the ranks you go, the more content you'll unlock, and so forth and so on. Now, if you're a gamer, this is all going to look very familiar to you. But if you're not, don't worry. There are simple netcasts and videos that'll walk you through exactly what you need to be successful. So remember, the content of these last 2 modules can be accessed through the 3D Game Lab LMS. But you'll still need to submit the work you're submitting to 3D Game Lab through Blackboard too. So you do the work in 3D Game Lab and submit it through both LMSs. You're going to love 3D Game Lab. It's probably the coolest LMS I've ever played with, believe me. Have fun.